Hello and welcome to Manibil. This is annoyingly the second attempt for me to do this video here, and it's because for some reason the first recording it ended up being corrupted, and I'm not quite sure what happened. So I'm hoping this one will succeed. What I was trying to do in the video that you won't be able to, and I won't be able to see either, was explain my approach to time because I did a deconstruction or comment video on Bernardo Castro's presentation of his definition of time, which is sort of nowhere, everywhere, all the time, infinitesimally, infinitely small and large, and it's something like that, right? That is sort of okay, fair enough. It may be a coherent definition if you have all sorts of underlying philosophy and definition of terms and meanings and semantics and so on before you arrive at that definition. Otherwise, you're just throwing words in people's faces to stun them into submission, sort of, right? And because he doesn't say, yes, of course, the terms I'm using needs a definition, you can go here or there or the other place and find out how these are defined, these terms, and how they relate back to my reduction base, which, by the way, is mind is everything, right? Which is sort of, okay, how do you square the circle, right? Um, but you can go and watch my video. It's called Everywhere and Nowhere, or is it called Nowhere and Everywhere? Some Bernardo Castro, Nowhere and Everywhere, I think it's called, right? It's from yesterday or a couple of days ago, right? So it should be very recent. Okay, so when we're talking about time, what are we talking about, right? Obviously, time doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a sound. It doesn't have a taste. It doesn't have a feel. It doesn't have a smell. So obviously, it's not something that arrives through the senses, right? Otherwise, you would have to be able to refer to one of these, right? Now, you can also say, okay, if you're talking about, for instance, an elephant, right? Is elephant arriving through your senses? I would say no. What arrives through your senses is a bunch of colors, sounds, tastes, and so on that is sort of presented in this screen of perception, to stay with the Bernardo Castro term, right? And from that, the mind extracts cognitions. For instance, elephant, right? So from the inside of this screen, that is potentially based on something arriving from the outside of the mind or the screen, right? The mind attaches certain cognitions onto the screen. For instance, elephant or carry bag or, Rolls Royce or, rocket, right? These the terms I'm using is a terminology to describe the particular cognition, not the cognition itself, so to say, right? But leave that alone. Time doesn't arrive through the senses. So where does it come from? It cannot come to my mind other than through my senses, right? I don't believe I'm not going into any kind of transcendental whatever, anything like that, right? No mysticism here. What comes to my mind, if anything comes to my mind, is through senses, right? I'm willing to go there. Empiricism is the only channel to knowledge, right? Okay. So if you have something that comes from if time is something you describe an outside, using that time to describe the outside, then time is something you are bringing along from the inside, attaching to that story somehow, right? And what is that story you're attaching time to? Well, I would say that's a memory. Memory is a set of snapshots of situations that are no longer the case. Right? If you have a memory of yesterday you were buying a pizza down at the pizza shop, right? You have a memory of that situation. Or maybe a set of situations, but not, let's just call it a situation or an event, right? event, situation, snapshot. It's the same thing I'm referring to, right? And you have a whole bunch of these, right? Way back, one behind behind the other, and so on, right? When you went to repair your car, back before that, and when you did, mow your lawn before that, and so on, right? Back, there's a sort of a string, you could say, right? And that string is a description I'm adding. There isn't a string, right? But it feels like it's a good idea to put it on this, what we could call a timeline, right? Where this event is before this event, which is before this event, and so on, right? So, but that doesn't in itself, in my opinion, create time, right? What I think of as time is that, and for a lack of a better term, I'm using a spatial term, right? The distance between events in my memory. And that distance is something the mind uses that I can't get to. I can only have a notion of it, but I can't pinpoint what it is. I can't use colors and sounds and so on to describe it, right? The mind does something that puts sort of a quote, which is a sort of an analogy, a metaphor for it, right? A distance between events. So if I have a new event today, it sort of is placed in front of all the other events that are in this line of events, right? But it's placed in front of the most recent event with a distance that the mind creates based on some measure stick. Some kind of, internal clock of some kind, right? So it can say, okay, if nothing happened in my life for a long distance since the last event, there's a lot of time since the last event, but I can't say what it is that time. I can only say the mind is putting some distance between the events, and that distance is a sense of time. Or time is that sense I have of that distance between the events. So I have to be careful to put it without, presupposing stuff, right? Okay. And this presupposing stuff is, and using metaphors to describe time and so on, time flows and time stood still, and it's all sort of spatial and distances and so on, and happenings and so on. But that's not time, right? Is it? Time doesn't flow. Flow something a river or something like that does. That's not time, right? Time is not doing anything on its own, right? Time is just sitting there in the memory, giving a notion of distance between events, in my opinion, right? So, what is it that then, what might potentially be that internal clock that the mind is using? Because I think time is a tool. We wouldn't have a notion of time if there wasn't something that it works towards, right? And in my opinion, it often comes back to survival, you could say. It comes back to Darwin's, survival of the fittest or the smartest and the most efficient and, something like that, right? And if you are, let's say, this is sort of a thought experiment, right? You're standing there on a hill, and just next to you is a tree with an apple on it, and it's a nice ripe, red apple, and it's just, you can grab it and eat it, right? Or when you look maybe in your binoculars, right? There's a hill over there. And you have to look in your binoculars to look at that. There's a tree on that hill over there, and there's actually a similar apple that is just as red and the same kind of tree, and it's basically the same apple, right? Different, but the same, right? Now, what kind of measure stick would time be in order to further your life? Well, time would be the shortest distance to the next event that you want. You're rationalizing about what you want. You want an apple because you want to eat it, because you want to further your living, right? Now, it would be stupid to walk down the hill to the next hill, up the next hill to grab that apple over there, right? Rather than grab the apple next to me, right? Why? Because there's more time between one event than the other event. And by optimizing my use of energy this way, right? You could say energy is there's an energy what's the term I'm looking for? A certain term I forget. Conservation of energy, you could say, right? That's the one I'm looking for. Yeah, that just grabbing the nearest apple, there's the shortest distance to the next event that you want, right? If there wasn't another, if that tree next to me wasn't there and the hill over there had a tree, that might be the nearest event, right? But since this new one appeared, all of a sudden that event is closer to the now than the other event. At least that's my rationalization, right? Or my reasoning, you could say, right? Maybe I should call it reasoning. So there's in my opinion, there's a very strong connection between survival, reasoning, energy consumption, events, in order to describe what we mean by time, and memories and so on, right? So it's a complicated situation for why time is useful. But I dipped into thinking about now what might that internal clock be? Well, the one I've come up with some time ago is, and I think I have presented it here on my channel many years ago when I only did it in Danish, right? Which is time could be heartbeat, a clock, an internal clock in the body and in the connection between brain and mind and so on. There is obviously some connection, right? When I'm thinking of having something to eat, I move about my body and shove it into my body and something like that, right? There is some kind of connection between body and mind, you could say, right? Let's just leave it there, right? This is not metaphysics as such, right? That it's not very unlikely to think that there's a connection between how the heart works and the mind works, right? So that the heart works as a clock, also as a side effect for mind, in order to have an internal clock. It's the measure stick the mind uses in order to figure out a sense of time. To put a measure stick between events. How many heartbeats are there between two events? Right? I see no problem in that. I see no problem in that being sort of a measure stick. The heart is sort of, it's a regular kind of, electric pulse or, whatever it is, right? And, the more heartbeats there are between two rational events, less likely I am to survive, right? Two life-furthering events, let's say, right? So the faster the heart beats, the more likely I am to die quicker, right? So time runs faster when I'm running. And there's sort of a stress thing about it, right? But time runs slow when I'm very relaxed, sort of, right? I have more time, you could say, to think about whatever, right? Rather than if something goes very fast, it's a quick heartbeat, sort of. There's a very few heartbeats between events, so to say, right? things unfold quickly this way, right? Now, and this is not a fully formed kind of theory or anything like that. It's just my sort of low down and dirty, quick and dirty approach to time, right? But the most important takeaway is this categorization I do with time being sliced up in three pieces called the past, the now, and the future, right? The past is my memory, right? That is my past. There's also a more official past, which is history. But that is sort of people stitching together all sorts of pasts and stories and rumors and propaganda into what is called history, right? And this kind of memory is history is not memory. History is a consensus story about memories, you could say, right? And I'm interested in history because that I am choosing to go with some of it at least, right? But I like to be close to history. I like to be secondhand at best, right? For instance, I'm doing I mentioned this not too long ago. I'm doing some translation of some German soldiers' mail during the First World War. A German soldier who entered the First World War on the Western Front in 1917, and apparently, as far as I can figure out, he survived, and he was captured by the Americans, I think, or so on. But we have sorted all these 100 or 200 letters, or how many there are, into chronologically, so they are dated and at the top of the letters, right? And we are translating them one after the other, in the sort of this timeline fashion, right? And that is very close to history. There might not be that much meat on the story after all, but at least it's some dude who has been on the front, apparently, right? It could be made up letters. All soldier mail could be made up. Somebody just, conspiracy, right? I just don't find it likely. I am willing to go with this was actually somebody sitting somewhere in a ditch, shooting at some other people in a ditch, and were forced to do it by somebody calling themselves the government, right? And this is sort of a first, what's it called? First, second person? I forget. What's it called? Second level story. What's it called? The first person is the soldier, right? The second. What the hell is it called? Second level. Second. Okay, you know what I mean, right? Hopefully. So it's as close I can get to it without being there myself, you could say, right? Okay. The sectioning of the idea of time or the timeline, you could say, right, to stay with that metaphor, that there's the past, which is based on memory. There's the now, which is based on empiricism, which I'm experiencing color, sounds, and so in the now, right? And there's the future, which is sort of an idea of what might happen based on what was in the past, in my memory, and what I'm experiencing now, right? Which is kind of science, right? That's what the approach that seems to work best is science, right? Somebody wants to look at tea leaves, some wants to listen to their priest, right? Most people are actually doing science, and I would say that even those who are seems to be mystic, they're actually doing science also, right? They're just presenting themselves as being mystic in order to conform to some kind of, they're afraid of being ostracized, right? Okay, this sectioning of time into three lumps, which is called the past, the present, and the future, right? This is where the big thing is for me, right? This is the delineation of where you can have knowledge. Or when, I should say, when you can have knowledge, right? Not where you can have knowledge, but when you can have knowledge. Because all that goes on in your mind at the same time there's a lot of things going on, right? So you can't just call all of it knowledge. Then it loses its idea of what you mean by knowledge, right? It loses its meaning, so to say. If everything you experience is knowledge, then why the hell are you labeling that particular, all of it knowledge, all parts of it knowledge? Because then it's just an artificial term that doesn't really say anything, right? So you have to pinpoint exactly what you mean by knowledge. And there's both a where and a how and a when you can have knowledge, right? And this all has to limit, they all have to be in place in order for it to be called knowledge, right? The where is, it's only you that can have the knowledge. You are the where, you are where the knowledge is that you know, right? What can be knowledge is a very strong definition of what exactly you mean experientially, what you mean by knowledge, what you refer to when you knowledge. And when is where you say the past, in my opinion, the past can't be knowledge and the future can't be knowledge, right? Because the past was made up of empirical experiences of which I have knowledge, of which I've had memories, right? But now they are snapshots of, mental snapshots of prior experiences. Those can be upgraded to the same as the direct empirical experience I have in the now, right? And the future obviously cannot be knowledge because you do not have empirical evidence of any kind. You don't even have memories of it, right? So the highest level of insight is in the now. The next best is having a memory of prior experiences. And the third best is having an idea of the future based on what went on in the past and what is going on in the now, right? Often called science. So, when it all comes down, what knowledge can only be by you in the now, and it's based on your qualia, right? I say based on your qualia. They're not necessarily, knowledge is not necessarily qualia, but I might go into that another day, right? So this is what I use time for. These three lumps of splitting up the sort of timeline, you could say, right, is the most important aspect of time, in my opinion. Okay, there you have it. Please share, like, and subscribe. Consider donation or joining the board, links below. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.